Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree. I don't normally do multiple video game topics in a week. I try to, spread things out and have different variety. But today I want to talk about another video game topic, and this is the Sega 32X. I want to talk about the 32X because it has a soft spot in my heart. Um, I got my Sega Genesis September 7th, my birthday, 12 years old, 1992. Um, 94, excuse me. 94. I got the year wrong. 1994, my 12th birthday. God, I can't do math. Anyways, and I fell in love with it. Now, I had been wanting a 16-bit console ever since I saw commercials for the TurboGrafx 16 back in the late 80s. I never got a TurboGrafx 16. I didn't get a Genesis when it was new. I almost got a Super Nintendo. That's a story for another day. I'll tell it one of these days. I may have already told pieces of it in other videos. Um, but I ended up getting a Genesis for my 12th birthday, and I was in hog heaven. I loved it. I got Sonic 2 packed in with the console. I sent in the questionnaire that got me a free game. I got Turbo. Toe Jam and Earl 2, Panic on Funkatron. Fucking loved it. Begged my mom to get me a 6-button controller. She did. And they bought me 3 new games for Christmas that year. Mortal Kombat 1, Mortal Kombat 2, and Shinobi 3, Return or Revenge of the Ninja Master. I always forget. I'm sorry. Now, the reason why they got me Shinobi 3, even though I'd never heard of Shinobi, was because they knew Mortal Kombat and Ninja Turtles were ninja games. They knew I had Ninja Turtles on the NES. I had Ninja Turtle action figures, so they knew I was into, quote, ninjas. And they thought Mortal Kombat was a ninja game, because it was. It has Sub-Zero. He's a ninja. Scorpion, he's a ninja. Reptile, he's a ninja. So they saw Shinobi and they're like, oh, our kid likes ninja games. Let's get our kid another ninja game. So, and because it was number 3 and Mortal Kombat 3 wasn't out yet on home consoles, it had just come out in arcades earlier that summer or was about to come out. Maybe it hadn't even come out yet. I don't know. But I was getting video game magazines, Electronic Gaming Monthly, Electronic Gaming Monthly 2, Game Pro, Sega Visions, um, you know, PC Gamer, etc. I was reading the magazines fucking all the goddamn time. That's all I did was just because there was no internet back then. When I say there was no internet, I mean it did exist if you were rich, but I didn't have the internet didn't exist for me or people of my social class for another decade. So there was no internet back then. There were no websites. There was no, it just was magazines. That's all I had. And I kept reading about this new add-on Sega was making for the Genesis called the 32X. It was going to be a 3D 32-bit arcade add-on that upgraded your Genesis to next gen. Now, the actual next gen machine that was on the way was the Sega Saturn, which was going to retail for $400 US, 1995 money, and the Sony PlayStation, which was going to retail for $300 US, 1995 money. That was out of my reach. I already had the Genesis. The 32X when it launched retailed for 180 US dollars, 1994 money. Again, that was out of my reach. I begged my mom to buy me a 32X. I said it will make my Genesis better. It'll give me better graphics. It'll give me better games, etc. And she very snarkily replied, I just bought you a game console. You said it was the best there was. You begged me for it. And now you need me to upgrade it because it's not the best anymore. Enjoy what you have. Be happy with what you have. So I did. But I kept reading about 32X in the magazines. And I wanted one so bad. Yeah, I had Mortal Kombat 2 on the Genesis. And I loved it. And I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't take my TV and my Genesis to the arcade and plug it in and compare it side by side to the arcade machine, in 1994 because nobody fucking did that. So I didn't know it wasn't 100% identical to the arcade because I wasn't going to the arcade anymore. I had the game at home. I was playing it at home, because people didn't fucking care. But I did notice there were some things that I remembered from the arcade that were missing. Some of the sounds were missing. The forest didn't have the trees making any noise. Raiden didn't yell when he flew across the screen. I noticed some of the colors were off. I noticed these things even without like going to the video store and comparing them, or excuse me, the video arcade. So I was excited to learn that there was going to be a more arcade perfect translation of the game for the 32X. And I wanted it so bad because I was obsessed with Mortal Kombat back then, especially Mortal Kombat 2, which for the longest time was my favorite video game of all time. Supplanted 2 years later when I got a Super Nintendo and experienced Super Mario World for the first time. And then that was supplanted a few years later when I got a PlayStation and I experienced the legit greatest video game of all time, Final Fantasy VII, which 30 odd years later has, or 25 whatever years later, still holds true as the greatest video game ever made. Nothing's even come close. Um, so yeah. Anyways, I was obsessed with Mortal Kombat 2. I really liked Sega. I really liked. I was getting into 3D games. I really wanted the 3D graphics, but I didn't have the money for it. So, needless to say, by the time I finally found a 32X used at a video game store in like 2003, 2004, the guy didn't want it. He didn't even put it out on the shelf. I just asked him. We were just talking. We were talking about Sega stuff, and I said, "Do you have any Sega stuff in the back that you haven't put out yet?" And he said, "Well, actually, I've got a 32X." And he looked at it, and he said, "You know what? If you give me $5, it's yours." So I gave him $5, and I took it home, and I was happy as fucking shit to have it. He had like a couple, maybe 4 or 5 32X games on the shelf that I bought. And then, I bought a couple off of eBay. There were a couple other, used video game stores. I went to Boise, which was not far of a drive, and found some used video game stores there. Picked up some more 32X games. I amassed a nice little 32X library over the span of the 2 or 3 years I had the 32X. And I got to experience it, not as current gen. By the time I got to play 32X, PS2 was already out. Xbox was already out. GameCube was already out. Computers were like mind blowing. We had games like Fear and Gun and fucking Halo and Fable, So the 3D graphics of the 32X were old hat. They weren't impressive by that time because we progressed incredibly fast. If you go back and look at it, it was incredible how fast we progressed. And so it was no longer impressive, but I didn't care. I just had fucking fun playing the games. And so I've already done my top 25 list of, greatest 32X games, which, was an interesting list to make because there's only 34 titles released for the machine. So it was basically just throwing away the rubbish and organizing what was left. Now, there was also some lore behind the 32X. Now, I'm not going to get into the behind the scenes stuff, its development and all that, because that's messy and other YouTubers have already done it. They can do it better than I can. But I am going to talk about some of the stuff that I never got to experience regarding the 32X. Now, even though I did have a 32X, a Genesis Model 2, and a Sega CD Model 2 at the same time, I never did track down any 32X Sega CD games. So I never got to experience any of the enhanced Sega CD games that were available for 32X. I never got to play those. Eventually, I did get a Saturn, so I was able to play some of those games that were released on Saturn. But they were different versions of the game, so I never got to experience the Sega CD versions. And don't get me wrong, I'm going to talk about Saturn in another video down the road because, I got thoughts on the Saturn. I'm going to do a whole ass video on the Saturn because I got some fucking thoughts on the Saturn. But I loved the 32X. I remember walking home from the store with my new video game magazine in hand, sitting on my bed just reading the articles, and I got to the page that said Sega to discontinue 32X. And I literally broke out in tears because I didn't have the money to buy one at the time. And I was like so enamored by the 32X. I wanted it to be a success. I was personally offended that nobody else bought the thing either. And I was upset that they were discontinuing it because I really wanted it to be a success because I saw the potential it had and I really wanted one. And I really wanted more games for it. And so I got really heartbroken. Um, Now, let's be real. By the time I got a 32X, I was no longer impressed by the 3D graphics, obviously. So there was a critique of mine where I went in with it like, well, this is good, would have been cool at the time, but it's not cool now, but I'm still cool with it because, yeah, it's pretty neat to go back in time and see what could have been. I really liked the 32X Mortal Kombat 2 port. I really liked Virtua Fighter. I really liked Doom. Shadow Squadron was fun. Star Wars Arcade was fun. Cosmic Carnage was fun. I had a blast with my 32X. I didn't actually get to 100%. I never owned every game on the 32X, but I owned most of them. I had like 24, 25 games when it was all said and done. The rest of them I've played through emulation as time went on, so I have experienced them all. But at the time, I had like, at least two-thirds of the library physically in my living room. And I played the fucking shit out of them. Yeah, at the time, I also had a GameCube, and I also had, my sister had a Dreamcast. I had a Nintendo 64, a PS1, Super Nintendo, Genesis, etc. So I had other games to play, a Saturn, other games to play. So I didn't just sit and play 32X. I wasn't like engrossed in it or, absorbed into its world. I wasn't immersed in it, but I did play the shit out of it and I loved it. Will I ever go back and buy another one? I don't know. The answer is I don't know because I don't know if I feel like collecting video game hardware anymore. I can play the games. I have the ROMs. I have the emulator. I can play the games anytime I want. So I just don't know if I feel the need to shell out exorbitant amount of monies for pieces of plastic that are just going to give me access to the ROMs I already have. And before you cry piracy this, piracy that, those ROMs, those 32X games have never been reissued. They're not being sold by Sega. And me giving some money to a scalper isn't supporting Sega either, so fuck off. I'm going to pirate those games because they're basically abandonware at this point. So don't come at me with that, ooh, piracy bad bullshit. Um, don't. You're not going to phase me on that. Once you learn the history of the 32X, you do lose some of your appreciation for it because you realize that Sega was fighting itself. Sega of America was fighting for the 32X. Sega of Japan was fighting for the Saturn. The two companies didn't get along, and instead of, letting Sega of America do their thing and Sega Japan doing their thing, they pretty much forced the Saturn on the U.S. market that wasn't interested because the Genesis didn't, or Mega Drive didn't sell worth a shit in Japan. So Sega Japan was like, get rid of this thing. And Sega of America's like, that's our bread and butter. We don't want to get rid of it. We want to prolong it. And Sega of America did their best. You got to give them credit for that. And, Big Brother was like, no. And they, put the kibosh on that. And that was that. The rest is history, you know. But uh, even though I lose some of my appreciation for the 32X, because of that, I still appreciate what it ended up doing, not necessarily what they tried to do. If the Saturn hadn't come out in 94 in Japan, 95 in US, if it had come out in 96 alongside the N64, the 32X would have had more time to breathe. And it could have had more games, and it could have sold more units, and probably could have been better. Or, alternatively, if the 32X had never existed in the first place, Saturn wouldn't have been in the financial trouble that it was, and Sega wouldn't have needed it to be a success when it wasn't, and they probably wouldn't have knocked over the dominoes that put them out of the game industry entirely, or hardware industry entirely. But that's neither here nor there. We can't play the what if game because we don't know what would have happened. All we can do is appreciate what we did get. What we got were 34 okay games. None of them are fantastic. I want to be honest. There's not a single game on the 32X that I would argue is a great game. Um, there are pretty good games. There are decent ports of existing games. And there are some okay to good game quality games. Most of them are average to above average at best. But they're still enjoyable games. A game doesn't have to be, a 4-star AAA blockbuster to be a good game. There's room in the market for 3-star games, 2.5-star games. There's room in the market for that. So I enjoy the 32X. I miss it. I wish it had done better than it did, but I also wish a lot of things had gone differently than they had. I wish that the Wii had been not called the Wii and would have been as powerful as its competitors like the GameCube was, and had played DVDs and been in HD, etc. I wish the GameCube would have played DVDs and had been more successful than it was. There's a lot of things I wish would have happened that didn't. And I also wish to God Nintendo had never made Labo, but I have to live in a world where Labo fucking exists, and I have to give Nintendo the goddamn side eye every time I think about Labo. Because I'm never gonna get over Labo. Fucking trying to sell cardboard. God damn it. Get over yourself, Nintendo. Stay cool.